Back in the 1970s, one of the shows my parents enjoyed watching together was the Rockford Files. I was pretty young back then, so I didn't quite appreciate how totally awesome the show was until I started watching the reruns in the 80s. You see, much like Ferris Bueller, I often found myself plotting away to stay home from school, particularly in those middle school years of grades 7, 8, and 9. And I've got to say, on the times I was able to convince my mother to let me stay home, I made the most of it. After sleeping in until about 9 a.m. or so, I would make my way into the family room and flip on the TV. I'd worry about making up the schoolwork I missed another day. One of the shows I fell in love with was the Rockford Files. It seemed different from a lot of the other private investigator shows that were on TV at the time. First, it had a killer opening theme song by Mike Post. Now, Mike Post had composed some of the greatest TV themes of all time, including Magnum P.I., The A-Team, and Hill Street Blues, just to name a few. But my favorite has to be the Rockford Files theme. Also, Jim Rockford had a past. After all, he was an ex-con, although he always claimed he'd been falsely convicted. And he wasn't rolling in the dough. In fact, it often seemed like he could probably charge, and should charge, more than the $200 per day, plus expenses. That was his fee. And let's face it, it just doesn't get much better than living on the beaches of Malibu. So what if he just lived in an old trailer? Either way, he still lived on the beach. And Jim didn't drive a Ferrari. No, not even a Trans Am. Jim drove a Pontiac. In James Garner's memoir, he stated, "I've been asked why he didn't drive a Trans Am instead. Well, he would have liked one. It's much sexier, but I don't think he could afford it." Also, James Garner did a lot of his own stunts, including the famous J-turn, which I've heard is named after Jim Rockford. James Garner explained the J-turn like this: when you are going straight, in reverse, about 35 miles an hour, you come off the gas pedal, go hard left, and pull on the emergency brake. That locks the wheels and throws the front end around. Then you release everything, hit the gas, and off you go in the opposite direction. You know what? I'll take your word for it, Jim. Regardless of how it's done, it's pretty cool to watch. So why was the Rockford Files canceled during its 6th season? Well, that's an interesting story. You see, James Garner was really sick and was dealing with bleeding ulcers. The doctors had told him to take off at least a month, and they would revisit after that time. However, Universal threatened to sue him on breach of contract. James Garner countersued and won. Chalk that up as one for the good guys. With that said, Universal pulled the plug on the show. Interestingly enough, Universal must have decided that there was enough interest still in the Rockford Files character that there were 8 reunion movies in the 90s that aired on CBS. These movies reunited most of the cast from the original show, with the exception of Noah Beery Jr., who played Jim Rockford's father on the show, Rocky. Beery had passed away on November 1st, 1994, so the first of these films, which aired just a month later, was dedicated to Beery. James Garner himself passed away in 2014 at the age of 86 from a massive heart attack. So, there you have it. Personally, I really wish that Universal had just given Garner some time to take care of his health so that we could have seen Jim Rockford for a few more years. The shows were always funny and very entertaining. How about you? Were you a fan of the Rockford Files? Did you see any of the reunion movies that took place in the 90s? I look forward to reading your comments. Also, I would greatly appreciate it if you would consider subscribing to my channel, where I talk about music, TV, and movies from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.